Hi, everybody. Welcome to another conversation with some of our amazing panelists, beneficiaries. I'm a panelist. Okay, it's quite early here, so I'm just getting woken up. Welcome to our Erase Extinction event. I'm here with Sport Beattie, who is the founder of Game Rangers International. Hi, Sport. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much. And very good morning to all of your listeners or viewers in that part of the world. It's sort of coming to the end of the day this side. So I guess a very warm welcome to everyone. And thank you very much for having me on this panel today.
You're in the UK right now, is that right?
That's correct, yeah, in Scotland.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're a very, very busy man and not easy to get a hold of, and you're always out and about in the bush or in the UK or in Zambia. So thank you so much for joining us. And we're thrilled to have you again with us for the second Erase Extinction event. I love the topic that you're going to tackle today, which is wildlife crime, and that's really important. And so let's get right into it. I'd like to know, first of all, if you could tell us a little bit about what you do exactly at Game Rangers International and how you have come to talk about wildlife crime. That would be great.
Okay, thanks very much. Once again, welcome to everyone. My name is Sport Beattie. I'm the founder of Game Rangers International, or GRI. We're in our 15th year of operations now. And our mission is very simply to empower rangers and local communities to conserve nature. And that's based upon a very simple philosophy that we believe you can't save wildlife until you first save the men and women, so the rangers who are tasked to protect it, and also the local communities living closest to it. And we do that through a very simple empowerment model, which looks to provide three key ingredients to the rangers, so welfare, training, and operational support. It works very well. We've been having good success. We are predominantly focused in Zambia, and in Zambia we work primarily in the Kafue landscape, which is this huge, amazing wilderness, which is 66,000 square kilometers. It has lots of challenges, lots of threats. So we're kept very busy, but we have seen a lot of progress over the years, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
It's constant. It's like a constant uphill battle that you're dealing with. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so maybe it's just important to point out to the listeners and audience today that, being a ranger is not just about carrying a firearm and arresting poachers. We tackle it through an holistic approach. So we're empowering rangers across three different core functions in the conservation area. So wildlife protection or resource protection, wildlife rescue, and also community outreach. So each of those has different complexities and has different ways of doing things. But for today, I'll be focusing my talk mostly on the resource protection space. So those rangers that are carrying firearms, those who are going undercover, trying to help us to slow down or to stop the illegal wildlife trade and the wildlife crimes that we see.
Got it. Can you just do a very brief definition of what illegal wildlife crime is for our viewers?
Sure. Illegal wildlife crime is simply, harvesting of wildlife, and that could include fauna and flora, without a license or a permit, and doing so in an unsustainable way. And obviously that's done at different levels as well. So someone could harvest wildlife just from a subsistence point of view. Others harvest wildlife illegally from a commercial point of view. And then once you get into that commercial space, that's really where, we're dealing with syndicates and lots of illegal elements. So yeah, I hope that answers
so
your question.
When I think of wildlife crime, to me, I think of like the transporting and exporting of animals, taking them out of their environment and sending them to overseas, like Asia, and being sold for their bones, for their meat, for their claws, and all that sort of stuff. And what are the biggest animals being targeted today? Would you say pangolin?
Yeah, so pangolin is sort of reported as the most highly trafficked animal by number. but you've got, there's so many different elements to this whole wildlife crime space. So maybe just for the benefit of the listeners, if I could just explain how we look at it, and we try and keep things as simple as possible for ourselves. So if you imagine 3 circles aligned horizontally next to each other, and each circle slightly overlapping with the one next to it, those 3 circles would represent the wildlife crime arena. And from left to right, the first circle would be the source. So that's where the animals or the contraband is being harvested from. So the national parks, the protected areas. The middle circle is transit. So that really speaks to the movement of illegal wildlife products towards a destination. And then the third circle on the right-hand side would be destination. So you've got 3 interlocking circles: source, transit, destination. And illegal wildlife crime is happening in all 3 of those circles. And we have to adopt different methods to tackle the wildlife crime in each of those 3 different circles. And so how we do that, if you then layer on those 3 circles going upwards, investigations, so trying to find out more about who are the players, how are they operating, when do they operate, where do they operate, what are they doing? So just trying to gather as much information that we can then hopefully turn into intelligence, which is actionable information that we can act upon. And that takes us into the operation layer. And hopefully through operations, we would interdict or apprehend criminals who are involved in the wildlife crime space. And then that would take us to the third layer, which is prosecutions. So investigations, operations, and prosecutions. Those are the 3 layers of law enforcement that we're supporting rangers within to try and tackle and mitigate wildlife crime. And again, just the way we look at it, there's 5 tiers of criminals, if you like, in the wildlife crime space. So tier 1, these are the guys that pull the trigger. So literally the poachers who pull the trigger, that's your tier 1. Mm-hmm. And they occupy most of their time from an illegal point of view in the source area. And then connected very closely to tier 1 is tier 2, and those are the porters and the people that carry the harvested products out of the protected area, whether that be bushmeat or ivory or bones, as you say, or possibly even pangolins, and move that contraband out of the source area into the beginning of the transit space. And those are usually the local communities that live contiguous to the protected areas. And that's why, as part of our mission, we focus very heavily on trying to see how we can support local communities with alternative means of income so that they don't get involved in the illegal wildlife trade. What's interesting from a gender point of view is the tier 1, so the people going out and actually doing the poaching, and the people who carry the contraband into the beginning of the transit space is very much a male-dominated space, I guess.
Yeah.
Transit circle, so the beginning of tier 2s and some of the tier 3s, it's actually quite, if you want to talk about gender equality in the wildlife crime space, there's a lot of women involved in that part of illegal wildlife trade. And so again,
sorry to interrupt, just so I can take on what you're saying. The level 1 and 2, it's community members that are living, around in the bush, right, or in the communities. They are the ones that are, yes, we know they are doing the poaching and moving it from A to B. And yes, it's more male dominated, but yet there are some female women involved in this. There is female wildlife crime, but not as much is what I'm gathering.
Absolutely. They play a key role in the sort of supply chain. In our experience, and so I'm talking from a Kafui landscape point of view, is most of the tier 1 poachers that we intercept and apprehend are, I would say, 99% from the local communities, because they live closest to the area. They know the area like the back of their hands. Yeah. But it's not to say that someone who's just an opportunistic criminal might decide to come into the area and go into the source and be a T1 and pull the trigger.
Sure.
But once the contraband gets into the local communities, into the villages, then definitely there's a huge role that women play. And again, it's because they don't have employment. it's all about trying to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And then they help to move that contraband. So if you could visualize this large protected area with 1 million people living around it, contraband flowing outwards into the local communities, it then begins to go down all these transitory routes, which are just tracks and dirt roads, towards the main trunk roads, which then take that contraband closer to its destination. And so depends on what the contraband is. If it's bushmeat, the destination is most likely to be a city like Lusaka, and I'm just using Zambia as an example. Of course, it's different in every country, but probably quite similar in many respects. If it's something like ivory, then the destination would be beyond Zambia. It would possibly be going to the Far East or to some other country. So
why is that?
Just to come back to
why, if you're talking about ivory or rhino horn, why would that surpass the local area of transportation?
So locally, the demand for wildlife is really focused around protein and also just the taste of bushmeat. Bushmeat is considered a delicacy, and there's a growing middle class in Zambia who now have access to more income, and so they have this ability to purchase bushmeat. But there's no real desire locally for people to have ivory trinkets or ivory, unless they were part of the middleman process, part of that, the tier 1 to tier 5. But in the early days, sort of 10, 15 years ago, when we first started, we were seeing ivory and things being, value added in places like Lusaka. So, ivory turning shops. So taking a piece of raw ivory and adding value to it so that it left the country as not a finished product, but maybe something more valuable than it was when it was harvested. We don't see that anymore. That's just down to good law enforcement by Zambia. So most of the trophy type contraband is leaving Zambia in its raw state. And maybe just again to...
Can I ask you, Sport? So are you dealing more locally with subsistence poaching, bushmeat poaching, and that you're not dealing so much with the trophy hunting?
No. So you must have read my mind. So we speak of 3 different types of poachers. So you've got your subsistence type of poacher, and that's just the guy who's going out to try and put food on the table. Generally, they are unarmed. In other words, they're not carrying firearms, but they will be armed with spears, axes, snares, which are just the worst thing ever, probably going out with dogs. But their goal is just to get enough, to get something to bring food home. And then the next type of poacher you get is the commercial poacher. These are poachers who are armed, so they are carrying 1 or more firearms. Sometimes they borrow the firearms, they have a limited amount of ammunition, and their goal is to go out into the source area and harvest as much meat as they can per bullet, if that makes sense. So, and then they would bring that meat back through those processes I've described, the tier 2, tier 3, and they would sell that meat for commercial gain. And then your third type of poacher, who's actually your most dangerous type of poacher because he has a lot to lose, is the trophy poacher. So these are poachers that are going into the bush, well armed, well supported, and their primary goal is to harvest, certainly in the Kafui landscape, ivory, or pangolin, or possibly even lion bones. So touch wood, we haven't seen any cases of lion bone harvesting in the Kafui landscape, and I hope I haven't jinxed myself and my teams. The trophy poachers have mostly been focused on pangolin and ivory, and it's pangolin and ivory will move as quickly as they can out of Zambia through the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5. So to answer your question, we will tackle anyone we find undertaking illegal activities in the source area. We will also, try and mitigate and stop any transitory movement of any illegal wildlife product going down the transit space. But we tend to not focus on, the far destinations like Asia and other places. We leave that up to other organizations who work externally to Zambia. So we tend to focus on the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 criminals. There's much less sophistication. There's easier pickings, if you like, and it's easy to disrupt. Well, it's relatively easier to disrupt illegal wildlife trade in the transit space. The only problem with that, of course, is if we just focused on disrupting trade routes and stopping the trade, the animal is already dead. So you have to utilize your resources to best effect and try and stop the poaching at source, and just make it very difficult for people to want to move anything. And this comes to sort of the key formula that we always come back to in the law enforcement space is it's all about the perception of risk to the value of the product, or perception of risk to reward. Everything is anchored around that, and we can't really adjust or influence the reward side of the equation.
Oh, we got a little bit of a freeze happening here. Hopefully it will get fixed momentarily. Zoom. Can't hear.
There's good sentences being built on.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sport. You're cutting in and out a little bit. Okay, now Sport is frozen. Okay, well, while Sport is frozen, we will get to a couple of questions at the end of this about the very sophisticated syndicate wildlife poaching. Okay, so we have lost Sport and we are going to restart. Okay, stand by everybody. Technical difficulties, you know how that can happen. 1 second. Okay, I hope Sport realizes that he's off the air for a moment. We just have him, please restart. Restart your computer. We lost you. CL, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so hopefully Sport is going to restart his computer in just a moment.
Okay.
So let's just stand by. But for our viewers and anyone currently listening, what I was saying is Game Rangers International, as we're learning, they deal with the lighter side of poaching and bush meat poaching, if you will. They don't deal with international wildlife crime, illegal wildlife crime, which is things moving from different countries in Africa, moving to Asia. But we are going to ask him some of those questions because it's fascinating. Because there is a huge impact of the illegal wildlife trade, which is absolutely unsustainable and harms wild populations of animals and plants, and is really pushing these species, these endangered species, toward extinction. And I can also tell you that illegal trade negatively impacts a country's natural resources and the local communities that might otherwise benefit from tourism or legal sustainable trade. Okay, and that's Sport getting back to me, standing by. Okay, let's try and get him back on. Okay, jump back on, Sport. Okay, sorry for the dead zone, everybody. Please jump back on. We'll pick up where we left off. This happens, it's in real time. Back on. You're still here. Oh, here he comes. Sport, are you back?
Hi, Lisa. So, not sure what happened there. Probably because I'm talking too much.
It's tech. It's like the world of tech. It's your best friend or your enemy. What can you say? All right.
Okay.
So no worries.
I'm not sure where you lost me, but
yeah,
I was probably rambling on too much.
Yeah, I was trying to get your attention, but it's okay. These things happen. If you can please start your video. CL, are we still recording?
Yes, you're still recording and everything's going well.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so Sport, I would say I kind of lost you at where you were discussing how you're stopping bushmeat poaching and involved with the lower levels, you like the less harmful levels, as opposed to the international moving of product from Africa to Asia. So you were midway through,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
All right. Sorry, I do apologize to the listeners if I'm going to repeat myself. I think where I may have left off then is that I was just describing the different types of poachers, and then in that tier 1 to tier 5 space. So just to maybe just clarify there, tier 1 is the person who pulls the trigger. Tier 2 spaces, those people involved in actually moving the contraband to the supply chains or the transitory routes. It also includes, the ladies and the men who are receiving the contraband. Tier 3s is involved in moving it from the communities into the sort of marketplaces, to the wholesalers, to the businessmen. These are not very well established business people, if I can say, not very well connected. A tier 4 person involved in illegal wildlife trade is quite a well-established business person, may even be a government official or someone who is quite well connected, and you would have to be very careful how you approached and dealt with that type of person. Tier 5s, these are very well connected people in positions of power who can make your life a misery very quickly. So in GRI, we tend to focus on the tier 1 to tier 3 space, and we believe that that's where we can support maximum disruption. But I think what I then went on to explain is everything we do is about the perception of risk to reward. I don't know if you...
That's where you left off. It was like, yes.
Okay, so we can't really play much with how we influence the reward side. And there's other people external, who are closer to the destination who can. We focus more on the perception of risk, and the key word is perception. So it's people's perception. So anyone who might think of getting involved in illegal wildlife trade, if their perception of risk is low, they would be more likely to get involved, especially if they are struggling or have no employment, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to make sure that the perception of risk is kept high. And there's a number of different ways we can do that. It's a constant game that we have to play to ensure that the people's perception of risk in all of those spaces and amongst all of the tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3s, or would be tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3s, their perception of risk needs to remain high. Now, of course, some people are just born with a criminal mind, I think, and it doesn't matter what your perception of risk is, they're still going to go and poach or get involved in illegal wildlife crime.
Yeah.
But,
it's fast money, for people who are, doing it for some money, it is fast, quick money. And the whole issue that we always talk about is, okay, well, what's the alternative livelihoods? And is it something, are there enough resources for alternative livelihoods, enjoyable livelihoods? And it's like getting fast money so how do you get people off of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why, as GRI and most of the other conservation groups as well, is you can't tackle these problems in isolation. So on the one hand, you have to do law enforcement, because if you don't, the wildlife will just disappear very quickly. And so too will the habitat. And that's an important point I just want to make is, there's again, no point in us saving wildlife if we can't also save the habitat. It's just as probably more important than the wildlife. Wildlife can recover, habitat takes much, much longer. So whilst we're doing law enforcement, you have to find ways to help the local communities find different means of income to get employment, etc. But those are much longer. Those take much longer to implement and to generate any tangible outcomes. So you have to do both. And I'm very pleased to say that we do, and we do both very well. But one can't operate without the other. Yeah. And then, of course, in between that, where humans and wildlife do collide, and where you do have this conflict, you always end up with wildlife getting injured and also humans. And that's why we've also got the wildlife rescue components, as when elephants go into a local village and crop raid, inevitably someone gets hurt, or a calf gets left behind, and then we have to go in and sort of help pick up the pieces. Or a lion goes into a community and kills some cattle, and then the lion gets a spear. we need to go and provide intervention from a wildlife rescue point of view. But we don't, if a lion tackles a zebra and breaks its leg, we're not going to go and try and fix the zebra because that's nature.
Yeah.
Okay. So this, law enforcement, it's an expensive business. Normally when I give a presentation, I start by asking the audience what they think it costs to protect 1 acre of the African bush for 1 year.
I would love to know that, because you work by donations as well, right? Like, I mean, we would love to know the cost of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting figure when you do the math, and we've been doing it long enough now to sort of say that it's as close as damn it to what it is it costs less than $1 per acre per annum to protect.
Say that one more time, Sport.
So it costs less than $1 per acre per annum.
Less than $1 per acre.
I just had a cup of coffee before this.
No, I'm having my coffee now. It costs, no worries. Yes, I hear what you're saying. It costs less than $1 per acre per animal to protect that.
Per annum, per year. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So when you look at it like that, it seems, like, hold on, why don't we all just, put in $10 and each protect 10 acres? And that is something that we should all be doing. But when you take a place like the Kafue, which is 15 million acres, it sort of quickly shows you how much is required. It's millions of dollars a year to protect these vast landscapes. And just to clarify, because that figure I've just presented only works at scale, so it wouldn't work in a small game reserve. You can only really use those figures when you're talking millions of acres. And just on that, there's a wonderful figure which the International Union for Conservation of Nature recommend, which is, we call it the ranger ratio. So the number of ranges per square kilometer, and they recommend a 1:50 ratio, so 1 ranger for 50 square kilometers. Now, a landscape like Kafue, which is 66,000 square kilometers, would require 1,300 rangers, which just isn't possible and would cost a tremendous amount of money. So we've had to be really smart over the years and see how we can bring other layers of law enforcement to bear, so that we extend the ranger ratio from 1:50 to 1:100 and even 1:150. And that brings the operating costs down. And the way we do that is we bring in an intelligence-led law enforcement. So just to share with the listeners, when we first arrived in the Kafue landscape, what we discovered is that it was still a very traditional way of doing law enforcement. A patrol team goes out, normally 6 men, gets put into an area, and they set up a patrol base, a fly camp, and they would go out for 10 days patrolling around that area, doing petal patrols, sort of going out. If you imagine a flower with petals.
Yeah.
And really those rangers are looking for signs, tracks, smells, anything that would suggest there's poachers in the area. And then they would do a follow-up and try and catch those poachers. It's that approach works fine when threat is low.
Yeah.
And you've got lots of manpower, but in the landscape we work, threat is very high and manpower is quite low. So we had to change things, and that's how we introduced this intelligence-led law enforcement, which has been very successful. And it's enabled us to really heighten the perception of risk and also achieve some really good outputs for law enforcement.
Sport, if I may ask you, how many people are on your team right now? How many rangers do you have currently operating under game rangers?
We're empowering 210 rangers at the moment, and our goal for the next 3 to 5 years is to empower 500 rangers.
Wow. And are you spending most of your time out in the bush with these rangers? How are you checking on all of them?
Yeah, I wish I could spend more time out in the bush, because that's really the place that I love, and that's what's inspired me and continues to inspire me to do this job. So I live and work in Zambia, and when I'm in Zambia, I live in the bush, in a bush camp alongside the rangers. I go out to check on the rangers, to do patrol assessments, get involved in some training, and but I don't spend as much time as I used to in the, like right in the bush, but still out there with the rangers. Currently, I'm in the UK because we're setting up a UK office just to try and increase our network and to generate some additional revenue so that we can achieve our goal of supporting 500 rangers.
Great.
But once, yeah, so I tend to spend at the moment half of my time here and half of my time in Zambia. But when I'm in Zambia, I'm as much time as possible in the bush. It's a beautiful place, and I would encourage
we all
everyone, including yourself, to come visit Zambia.
Yes, I am planning on coming next year. My other question is, I do want to ask you a couple of questions about illegal wildlife trade on a bigger scale. But one thing I do want to ask you right now is, how do you make sure that your rangers stay good rangers? That they don't get involved or persuaded by money to make bad decisions, or, give information out?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it comes back to our ranger empowerment model and why we started the organization to begin with, because, if you don't support the rangers and you don't provide them with everything they need, including good salaries and, just good welfare support, then it can be a much more tempting landscape for them to then get involved in poaching, or to turn a blind eye, or, worst case, to become, a trafficker or a poacher themselves. They can become the most well-trained poachers if we're not careful. So it really just comes down to keeping all the rangers we work with, keeping them close, making sure they have very good access to welfare. So, when they step out of their homes in the morning to go on patrol, they need to focus on what's in front of them, because it is a dangerous job, and they shouldn't be worrying about what's happening at home. Are their kids going to school? Is their wife, who's not well, able to get to the hospital? All those things which can trouble your mind, they need to know that those things are taken care of. And so that really speaks to the ranger welfare element, and of course their own health, well-being themselves. And then training, it's important to make sure they're, well trained, and not just once, but ongoing training, so that they can do their jobs professionally and safely. And then providing them with all the operational support that they need. And that's, vehicles, communications, equipment, rations, sending rangers out with no equipment and with poor rations, their motivation is going to drop very quickly. And, that's when problems start happening. We incentivize all the rangers we work with through performance-based bonuses. Those are linked to, the number of poachers they apprehend and the recoveries they make in terms of firearms and snares, etc. So there's a number of different levers we can, move around to ensure that rangers are provided with everything they need to do their job safely, number one, and efficiently and effectively as possible.
Yeah, I think that the state of mind of the ranger is so key, and they need to, like you're saying, they need to stay motivated. And I think it's great what you're offering them. The incentives make sense. They're treated fairly. They're treated very well. It's like with anyone at any job, you have to be recognized for your work and get, prize for it.
I'm really pleased, because when we started GRI 15 years ago, it just seemed that there wasn't, and that's why we started. It just seemed there wasn't that awareness of what the rangers needed, and even the recognition that they deserved. So what's encouraging is, we're now seeing a lot more talk about rangers, their welfare. And I think people all around the world are starting to really appreciate and recognize the critical and important role that rangers do play. And again, it's not just the frontline rangers who are apprehending poachers, but it's all the support rangers, whether you're a cook or a driver, whether you're a wildlife rescue ranger or a researcher, everyone has a role to play. And I think all of us, as honorary rangers, if you like, have probably the most important role to play, which is to try and find the funding to keep this whole machinery working. So that's the challenge. That's the conservation conundrum, is how do you keep the machinery working?
Yeah, it's like reinventing the wheel over and over. Okay, well, we have a few minutes left, and what I'd like to do is ask you a couple of questions on a bigger scale of illegal wildlife trade. There's so many animals that it's just being targeted each year, and it's such a high valued industry. It's fueled by such an insatiable demand for consumption and status and traditional medicine. The value of illegal wildlife trade has been estimated between 7 and 23 billion per year in the US. It's a very lucrative business. So the whole demand for consumption, from the consumer's point of view, how do you change the minds of people? Like all these animals that are getting transported, I mean, they're maybe mainly going to Asian countries, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if it's going anywhere else in particular, but how do you change the mindset of consumers and tradition from centuries?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the short answer is education. Educate, and really just help people understand, that it isn't sustainable. And if we carry on the current trajectory, well, in 10 to 15 years' time, we'll be looking at a very different natural landscape than what we're faced with today. So I've always said, we're like the brakes. We're just trying to slow things down for long enough that the younger generations can have that software that enables them to look beyond the financial gain that they might make if they were involved in illegal wildlife trade and wildlife crimes. So yeah, it really just comes down to education, but that takes time. It takes a lot of resource as well.
Yeah.
So there's no quick fix to this, but I really have to say, just from when we started, for as long I've been working in this space now for 25 plus years, there is a positive change. There's a lot of good work happening. There's a lot of organizations, probably more than ever before, involved in trying to help. And I just listening to kids and to the younger generations, I do feel that there's a far greater awareness amongst them of what they know is wrong and right when it comes to nature. So I think if we can just hold on for another 10 or 15 years, and of course, not just hold on, but try and reverse things, right? Because that's what we really want. And then as those younger generations come into positions of leadership and decision-making, I think we'll see a very different outlook on protected areas on the natural landscape.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so too. I mean, it's more sophisticated. Everything is so much more sophisticated today with social media and just syndicate poaching and how people are actually getting into the bush and all of that. So it's almost twofold. It's very sophisticated. This is everyone's been tackling this problem for decades and decades. It's at its height of the most sophisticated level today. But yet, on the other hand, with social media, there is a greater awareness, like what you're saying, and it is up to the younger generations to step up, and continue this fight. So if there was anything that you could do to stop wildlife crime, what would you, other than education, for people visiting Africa, for tourists, what would you say? Would you say ask before you buy, choose sustainable or certified products? Like, how do people know what they're buying when they're in Africa, and knowing that they're not buying any trinkets that were contributing to the end of an animal's life, for example?
Yeah, I think my message would be just don't buy anything. There should just be no wildlife trade altogether. So it's, if someone's trying to sell you something which even looks like it may have come from a wildlife or from, better just to not buy it, because you're just going to fuel the problem, and rather see how, with the same money you could, go and visit a local community and help the local community, or, buy something from the local community, which is not a wildlife product. And so we try and help an economy build around the protected areas.
And can people come and actually visit Game Rangers International? Like, I know you have like a baby elephant nursery, but if people want to understand more about what you do, your ranges, like, what could you offer somebody?
Yeah, so, and it comes back to your other question, is if someone was coming to Africa, I would suggest to them, if they're coming on safari, or even if they're just on a business trip, is ask to see the conservation side of wildlife. And I think that's kind of where it's going to go.
Yeah,
it's nice to go on a game drive and see lions and see elephants, but it would be much more meaningful to do that and see all the work that's being done behind the scenes. So yes, if you're staying at a safari lodge and you wanted to come visit our operations, it's simply a case of asking the safari lodge to make an appointment. We do make special arrangements, obviously, for some of our partners and donors. But something we're working on quietly in the background is to provide any person anywhere in the world that opportunity to have a deeper look behind the scenes of what's happening in places like GRI, and to really try and bring people, build this constituency of support and make people feel like they're part and parcel of what we do. It doesn't matter
absolutely.
Yeah. And we'll do that digitally. So you, even yourself in California, you would be able to click a few buttons and you'd be able to see exactly what's going on today at GRI.
And how can people reach out to you, and what's your website, please?
Our website is www.gamerangersinternational. It's quite a long word, .org. Or you can find us on Facebook under GRI Zambia. So just follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we'd love to, welcome anyone to Zambia. And if anyone is coming out to Zambia, please get in touch with us, and you'd be very welcome to come visit our project sites. And we'd love to have that conversation with you.
Well, I feel very privileged and honored to be able to speak with you, because it's, like, as I said in the beginning, you're very busy, and it's definitely not easy to get a hold of you. And I know you've got a lot of important things to do. So we really appreciate your time and your participation with Stop Poaching Now. And however we can help each other, let's continue to do that. And we've got some great other beneficiaries that I think you should all chat. We had Rachel on the other day. She was a delight, as usual.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to thank you so much for your time. Any last words, anything you want, any other message? I think you've said it all, but feel free to say last words.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk and talk, as you can probably tell, and I hope I haven't spoken too much and possibly confused the audience. But I just want to say thank you very much to yourself and to your team, Lisa, to Stop Poaching Now, and to everyone who's participating in this e-race event. Thank you for your support. We really appreciate it. And we would look forward to welcoming you to come to Zambia. Things, despite all the doom and gloom, things are positive. I'm positive for the future, and I look forward to what we can continue to do together. So thank you very much.
Lovely.